All you need is love. And all you need is love. Love. Love is all you need. Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. Gemini Brett here. It's been a bit. Thought I would share a example chart or journey that I was just about to record for the Constellations community, but it's been a while since I've been beaming in the social media places, so why not on Venus's day, Friday, with Venus in Libra? Why not share to you? That being said, if you have not found your way to the School of Earthstrology's Constellations community yet, I very much encourage you to check us out. So I want to share with you where you can before we dive into a chart example of Venus and Venus cycles. It's one thing that we're exploring in the Constellations community right now. So let me take you over to GeminiBrett.com. That's my website. It's a place where, by the way, you could go to book a reading with me, astrology sessions here. So if you're interested, for example, in exploring Venus and your Venus session with me, click a new client session and write in your intention that's the focus, or follow up if we've met already. If you click this Constellations Community tab, it's going to take you to this page where you can find out what Constellations is, the School of Earthstrology's membership community, why join, how it works this year, where we're touring one planet each month. We're currently in our Venus tour. So in the first week, there's an archetypal activation of the planet by myself and my dear partner, Scorpiana. Anna leads an astro coaching circle in the second week of the orbit. I take us on an Earthstrology deep dive in week 3, diving deeper into the astrology, the sacred astronomy, the sacred geometry and harmony and number magic. And then the week 4, we have a gathering and Q&A session where we do live chart examples with folks in the community stars that have aligned in constellation. So I hope you'll check it out. By the way, if you go down here, give us a try for a month. When you click join now, you can use this coupon code Star Tribe, and that'll bring you down from 2222 to 19 for the great cycle of the sun, earth, and moon. 33 for thrice great Hermes. So give us a try for a month. Check us out and spend some time with fellow star seekers like you. All right. Well, we are going to spend some time with a seeker called Jane Goodall today. Didn't mean to have all of these subtiles shown at the chart, although I will say it doesn't shock me to find that this is Jane Goodall strength and sevenness, because sevens can be out of the box, even somewhat heretical, or they help us explore hidden things in the world behind the world, like trying to learn chimpanzee language, I would assume, is in that mix for sure. Take a different view here. Well, that's fun to see, and I'm not surprised, but there's tons of these purple lines, which is the color code that I use to ask Astro Gold software to display fiveness, the quintiles, the biquintiles, a quintile being a fifth of the wheel, 72 degrees, and a biquintile being twice that, 2/5 of the wheel. So 144 degrees. So one thing that's cool to see is that type of shape connects Venus, who I'm here to focus on with you today, to Jane Goodall's Libra midheaven. I'm wondering, so we have her birth time from a biography, so the B Rodin rating. And so maybe we should be careful, especially with this pretty rounded number of 11:30 p.m., to put too much faith into 4 degrees and 16 arc minutes of Libra, culminating at the time of Jane Goodall's becoming. But if we were to work with that, and it's kind of cool to see, then we get this Venus bi-quintile to the midheaven. And we saw that Pluto has an alignment like this. So Venus and Pluto in biquintile, Venus in the midheaven in biquintile, and therefore this what we call a quintile arrow of Pluto in Cancer, Aquarius, Venus, and this Libra midheaven. And that's fun to see, because one of the things we're going to do today is to explore the Venus pentacle, which divides the zodiac into 5s. And I'll show you a little bit of how that works as we move along. All right. So I want to focus on Venus today, but I never look at a chart without considering the ground beneath our feet first, or perhaps the back upon which Mom lied as she was giving birth, right? And so the horizon, Horus, the ascendant, Sagittarius, descendant, Gemini axis at the time of Jane Goodall's birth. And so Sagittarius is said to be her horoscope, her rudder. I just want to check in. Let me stop the share real quick and make sure that things are on your screen. So Stephen, the Jupiterian, I see that you're here. Welcome. I hope you're doing well. Were you able to see Jane Goodall's chart when I was sharing it before? And on the Instagram side, seeing many familiar names. Hey, Lori. Hey, Kevin. Hi, Melissa. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the presence of your presence. So anybody, were you able to see the chart I was sharing on the screen? I just want to make sure all systems are go. All right. Well, I was just starting to work on kind of an instructional page for folks in constellations about connecting with Venus. And maybe first phase would be looking at Venus sign, right? So what is the Venus archetype? Even before that, what is Venus? Why should we care about Venus in the chart? Is Venus harmony and art? Is Venus love and relationship? Is Venus indicative of our personal expression of the goddess, the divine feminine? Where I began my astrological study at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, and that paradigm sees Venus as the anima, right? So for a dude like me, something that we're looking for out there, but need to find within to complete the sacred marriage, the hieroskymos. So the school treats Venus differently for somebody who's born woman versus man. And I don't know, the signs of the times and just challenges from community had me kind of move away from that a bit and to look for a relationship more through the lens of traditional astrology. Look for it more as kind of a 5th house thing, traditionally said to be the joy of Venus, so passion, romance, and such, or 7th house thing, the place of relationship, right? And so in a Sagittarius rising chart, like this chart that we saw for Jane Goodall, and Kevin, thank you for confirming that the screen share is working okay. Like I might actually look to Mercury, the planet that represents the 7th, to speak of relationship. I might look at the relationship between Jupiter, the planet that represents the first Sagittarius rising, right? And Mercury, the planet that represents the seventh, to consider what relationship might look like. So what's happening with a Pisces Mercury who's in Jupiter's sign, but very much in conjunct Jupiter, right? Let's go into the old school view of aspects, just the oppositions and the trines and the squares and the sextiles and cohabitation, like Sun and Mars here, right? And there's a blindness, there's an inconjunct, there's a disconnect between Mercury and Jupiter. So, I should warn you that I really know nothing about Jane Goodall besides that she very courageously went to Africa to be with the chimpanzees, and how, of course, and I think that was in the 1950s or 60s, that's going to totally throw a monkey wrench in the patriarchy's idea of, like, what a woman should be and do and those kinds of things. So I love that. And I'm hoping that we're going to find this in Jane Goodall's chart in general, and maybe also in Venus and the Venus cycle to which she was born. So this isn't me like cherry picking a chart because it confirms the way I teach about a particular planet or planetary cycle or astrology charts in general. It's me like knowing that Jane Goodall recently passed, and so she's there somewhere in the consciousness and saying, hey, let's grab a chart example, as I was starting to write this PDF. And so Jane Goodall it is. So let's learn and explore together, and I'll appreciate any education you might be able to offer about who Jane Goodall is in her life, to help guide our journey here. So once again, I'm very appreciative of you joining the live stream, and welcome anything you might wish to share. All right, so I'm going to try to get those in places where it's easy for me to look back and forth, speaking of. All right, well, when I looked at any chart, I'm first considering what was rising when a native rose. And so we see Sagittarius rising, and the moon apparently having just risen. But you know what? I've learned, especially for locations far north of the equator like Hampstead in England, that you need to be careful with the moon's altitude. So I'm noticing, for example, that Jane Goodall was born with the moon near the southern bending, right? The lunar nodes are the places where the moon snakes above and below the sun's path. So when the moon is far from the lunar nodes like this, that means the moon is far from the sun's path. Well, the south node in the northern hemisphere is where the moon descends down beneath the sun's path. So this is the moon like lower or further south than the Sagittarius degree in which she was traveling with at the time of Jane Goodall's becoming. So I can just see, and we need to get to an altitude list to confirm if this is true, but I can just see that while the moon is like in the 12th house in its zodiacal position, that the moon is likely beneath the ground. And it's true, right? So Jane Goodall's moon out of bounds, which I don't think should surprise us, is actually beneath the ground when she was born. So with Jane Goodall born nighttime, the moon we say is her sect light, and Sagittarius moon shouldn't surprise us at all, because I mean, this woman was a seeker and a traveler, a journeyer. I mean, you know, Sagittarius can have journeys to faraway lands and other cultures. So faraway lands indeed in chimpanzee culture would be about as foreign as it can get, right? We don't even share a language, he says as he circles the third. All right, so anyway, traditionally when Sagittarius is rising, that's the rudder. Well, then the steersman is Jupiter. So I'm interested in seeing Jupiter here in the 10th house. All right. So generally speaking, when to use the language of the old, when the steersman is in the 10th, or let's, if you prefer, the lord of the horoscope, horoscopos meaning not the chart, but the ascendant, right? When the lord of the horoscopos is in the 10th, then a person's path is going to have a lot to do with career, their reputation, honors, visibility, like that, right? Like that's the stage upon which the steersman lives. All that being said, I'm also considering always different house systems, like the equal house system. And the reason why equal is because it shows me the highest part of the chart, which the midheaven then is not. The midheaven is what is culminating, reaching its particular height, halfway between rising and resting. But that doesn't mean it's the highest part above the ground. That's found in the equal house 10th, right? Where the equals just take the ascendant degree. If indeed Jane was born at 11:30 p.m. on April 3rd, 1934 in Hampstead, England, UK, then 6:15 Sagittarius is on the rise. And the equal system just puts 6:15 on the cusp of every sign. So every house is an equal 30 degrees, right? Well, that shows us that Neptune is by far the planet that's highest above the ground. You can confirm that here in this altitude list. And that's really interesting to see. It's like Neptune has so much about mystery and mysticism and wonder and the like, but we find Neptune in Virgo, right? So seeking the mysteries of the land. It's cool to see this Mercury Neptune opposition. I got to say, I'm so ignorant. I don't even know if Jane Goodall was writing. I have to assume like her field notes and writings were key to her life. So we'll look into that a bit. But this looks very poetical as well. Is that a word? Who cares? It's poetry. Mercury in Pisces, right? Opposite Neptune in Virgo. From a modern astrology point of view, where Pisces is a Neptunian thing, you'll see a mutual reception there, which is interesting. I tend towards classical dispositorship, so Pisces being a Jupiterian realm, but I don't want to ignore that. There's something about Pisces that's so Neptunian, something about Neptune that's so Piscean. So it's cool to see Neptune on high and Virgo Neptune. It's like, what are like practices and systems that can help us get into mysticism? And there's something about this nature that's going to go to the great beyond, to feel this connection to, the oneness, the all there is. So this just like, love for, and I don't know if this is Jane Goodall projecting here, but love for nature, right? And connecting to, a different species, and probably as siblings and, equals, which is going to be an important word as we explore Venus and Jane Goodall's chart as well. So I look at both Virgo, which was the high point at the time of Jane Goodall's birth, and the high point 90 degrees from the ascendant is always in the 10th whole sign, a thing that I'm also always considering. I look at Virgo and therefore Mercury. It's kind of like equal contribute. That's the word. It like contributing equally to her career design. I'm looking at Neptune here on high as a huge part of that. So what will she be known for? Mercury in Pisces, where Mercury, by the way, is said to be in exile. There's something about that. I'm looking at Libra, midheaven, what was culminating, right? There's something really important about that. And then Libra guides my eyes to go looking for Venus. And here's Venus in Aquarius in the 3rd. I think no matter which way we slice this. So I use many house systems, as anybody who chooses a moniker like Gemini probably should. But I use many house systems because I think there's many parts of you or many parts of Jane. And I think different house systems like whole signs, I feel speaks to a piece of us that doesn't have her feet on the ground, a little bit closer to the archetypal soul. I like to see the high points in the equal systems, kind of speaking of the human. They're steered to our particular rudder direction, like Sagittarius rises extremely south of east, Gemini sets extremely north of west, right? And then I like to look at the quadrant charts, which are key to the midheaven, to align us as earthlings, connect us with Earth's directions. In England, Libra, the midheaven's always due south and the IC is always due north. Like these are Earth's directions, while the ascendant descendant are not. All right. So one thing I wanted to share with you here is that as much as we will find when we look through the lenses of a quadrant chart, like a Placidus system, Jupiter, the steersman of the chart, in the 10th, in this whole sign image, and this was true also in the equal sign divisions, we find Jupiter in the 11th. And what are 11th? I mean, inherently hopes and dreams, but really importantly, teams, cast, crews, community. And so what do we know Jane Goodall for? Now, you might actually know a thing about Jane Goodall. I feel like Venus Revive writes here, she wrote 32 books. So author, thank you. Cool. We could see that in the chart, but I didn't know. Venus also tells us she was a PhD and was published a lot. All right. But I know her, and it's like fantasy. So, but like out in the great beyond, like living with a community of chimpanzees, like studying them, studying the relationship between the primates and humans, and developing relationships with a community of a different species. All right, so. Discerning Light says it would be interesting to compare Diane Fossey with Jane Goodall's chart. They both had very different outcomes with their work. Yeah, totally. And it'd be really nice to hear more about that. All right. So let's talk about Venus and Jane Goodall's chart. And then we'll go, I guess we'll go to like Wikipedia and see if we might be able to learn a thing or two about Jane Goodall. I don't know if we will trust any of that, but where else can I look easily, right? That's going to be our place. So, and I'm just setting up a couple other places where we can look as well. Okay. And let's go have this journey. So I want to check in with some comments over here in the Instagram space. So Kevin says, to me, she is the perfect Venusian representation of the quiet power of love. There is an excellent pre-death interview with Jane Goodall by Brad Falchuk on Netflix in a new series he has created. Cool, I should go check that out. Kevin says she opened the door to understanding that animals have feelings and emotions like humans do. Okay. And Kevin, I'll just ask you, is that why that her opening the door to understanding that animals have feelings and emotions like humans do? Is that why you would say she is the perfect Venusian representation of the quiet power of love? Or are there things in her personal love life, relationship life with humans as well that contribute to what you share there? Heaven writes that I had the honor of attending one of Jane Goodall's presentations about 25 years ago as an undergrad. Wow, how absolutely exciting. Super cool. All right. Well, thanks also again for those contributions. That's why we want to do these things in community, right? I mean, generally, I won't choose a chart without knowing something about the person that I'm speaking about. But then again, like with these people I've never met, what do I know? So I learn astrology by connecting with fellow star seekers like you and, being with our charts together, exploring that, hence having community and groups, right? I'm really honored to be surrounded by folks who are typically courageously willing to share. All right. Discerning Light says Diane Fossey was working with gorillas and she was murdered by poachers. Holy moly. Gosh, I did not know that. I knew she was working with guerrillas. There was a third, Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and wasn't there a third woman who was working with the orangutans? Imagine that we're going to come across that in some of the biography spaces. All right, so let's go play. Let's go online. Well, before I do some more with Jane Goodall's chart, so let's look at Venus. Because I'd rather, look at some of these things before I learn something about the person so that I can address the skeptic in me. All right, so Venus, who we can see is in command of Libra here, which is on the midheaven, so one of the career planets. All right, now I'm going to look at Jupiter in the 10th. I'm going to look at Neptune in the 10th sign. So there's something very kind of spiritual, journey oriented there. But Jupiter's in Libra, right? We don't want to sleep on that. And then, in what we call the dispositor game, like first want to look at Jupiter's relationships, right? So if Jupiter represents the native, and that's like traditional astrology, and I'm down with it, then what's up with Jupiter opposite Sun, Mars, Uranus, squaring Pluto, right? So we see this T square. Pluto and Cancer, what's going on there? That's a generational thing of bringing absolute evolution to this idea of what Cancer is, what nurturing is, what tenderness is, So, Kevin, if indeed what you were saying about Jane Goodall being a representative for the quiet power of love, there's also something about family, like why can't I be in family with chimpanzees, right? why can't that be my family, my crew? Why can't there be tenderness there? Why can't non-human beings here on Earth have hearts and feelings as well? I'm sure that's part of it. But also just look at, what did 1934 England consider a woman's role to be, right? So Pluto and Cancer, there's something in a generational quest of completely evolving the idea of what Cancer is and what Cancer can be. There's a little bit of burn the June Cleaver apron and go out on the adventure. You see what I'm saying? And I would say that Pluto is going to be stronger for Jane Goodall than for many because of Jupiter, who represents her, if you're into traditional astrology, which I very much am, being in a very strong square with Pluto. You see Jupiter retrograde. Why? Because Earth was passing Jupiter by when Jane Goodall was born. How do I know? The sun is opposite Jupiter. That Jupiter is retrograde because Earth is passing Jupiter. And Earth is specifically close. I actually just dialed her birth date up here in Solar System Scope. You can play online with this amazing heliocentric or sun-centered model for free at solarsystemscope.com. And I could show you that, right? Like Earth is passing Jupiter by. Now, I can also see that this is not her birth year, and indeed it's not, so 1934, because this is not the Earth, Sun, Jupiter situation to which she was born. That's nice to know some astronomy, right? So we can get that fixed. All right, so now you can see that, right? Like Earth is particularly close to Jupiter. Jupiter is what we call it perigee, close to Earth. And so that's like a very important and powerful thing, like the tendencies and the nature of Jupiter and its, benevolence and optimism and kind of journey qualities and the many things, like they're going to be stronger for Jane. And I'm really interested in how the Libra nature of Jupiter shows up. That being said, when I look at Jupiter and Libra, then I go look at Venus, and Venus is in Aquarius, and Aquarius can be out of the box and alternative and revolutionary, even heretical, right? All right, so anyway, for me, the invisible planets like Neptune, like Uranus, like Pluto, they come to us and through us via their connections to the visible planets. And for me, the most important visible planet for a Sagittarius rising person is Jupiter. So we see really strong alignments of Jupiter to Pluto, right? So this idea of kind of changing the nature, this evolutionary kind of generational quest to completely revitalize through probably some death and rebirth the Cancer mysteries, right? So I mean, look, this is like in between world wars, right? Where a lot of like, well, I'm just going to leave that out. All right, so Jupiter is opposite Mars, especially, right? Sun, Mars, Uranus, Jupiter, Pluto, really strong T-square. So there's something in this kind of Aries impulse where we find the light. And of course, we know she's like a courageous explorer. She went out and about, she like lived with the chimpanzees in Africa, right? I know from a documentary I had seen some time ago, I should have paid more attention, that her mother went with her at least on the first journey. And I think that she, like, culture demanded that she have a chaperone, but it's pretty cool that it was her mother, right? So maybe we feel something there, and maybe you can see that in the Aries Sun, Mars here in the fourth house. I also want to say that's Aries is the fifth whole sign of the Sagittarius design. So there's a lot of light, strength, and power in the place of passion, romance, risk. But you can really feel that kind of independence and adventure and pioneering spirit in the Aries in this story, obviously, right? And I'm going to see that also kind of particularly strengthened because this alignment with Jupiter, who in a Sagittarius rising chart represents Jane, in the sense that many would look to the moon to represent mother. I mean, it's interesting to see that moon was rising, and hopefully they had a good relationship, since I do know that her mother was her chaperone for at least one of her trips and stays in Africa. So I think we'll get to learn some more about that together. All right. Well, when I looked at Venus here, Venus is in a very strong position. Now, we might ask why. Like, does Aquarius do that? Oh, some would say when Venus is cohabitating with Saturn in Aquarius, because traditionally that's his home, that might strengthen Venus. Now, I would say that here we're looking at Venus separating from Saturn. That's when you look at these aspect grids, you'll see like Venus and Saturn are conjunct, and they're 2 degrees and 58 minutes from having a perfect conjunction, but that S means separating, right? How do I know? Because Venus moves faster than Saturn, unless Venus is retrograde, moving at negative speed or backwards through the zodiac, or has just moved from reverse to drive and is stopped. Like Venus is going to be faster than Saturn, right? I can look at Saturn's speed, which is always slow. Saturn's moving 5.5 arc minutes per day, right? So like a 11th of a degree. Where Venus is moving about 1 degree per day. And this is why I'm saying this is a very strong Venus, because I'm looking at Venus phase. Now I'm getting ahead of myself, so let's just talk about Venus in Aquarius first. What, folks, here, I just stop the screen share so I can check in with your chat. What might we expect of Aquarius Venus? What happens when you combine Aquarius keywords and Venus keywords? What comes out? And while I'm waiting for you to respond there, I want to check in with some of what you've already shared. So Venus Revives giving us a lot of the news here that Jane established wildlife sanctuaries and animal liberation and ethical treatment in laboratories. That's great to hear. Thank you. We're going to see that in a huge way. Non-Human Rights Project, an honorary member of the World Future Council and appointed by the Queen. And Venus Revive is saying this is something to do with Pluto and Cancer. Yeah, I was talking about, like, evolving the very idea of what family is, so non-human rights as well. I'm seeing that in other places in her chart. Let's honor this too. Sagittarius rising with Jupiter in Libra, right? What is the spirit Jupiter of harmony, of balance, of equality? Like, is a chimpanzee not equal to me? Would be an interesting question to explore there. Okay, in response to Venus and Aquarius, what might we get? Discerning Light says outside the box and innovative. Some words for Aquarius, right? Well, how does it apply to Venus? Shauna Moon Mama, I love your updated name. Love exploration, new ideas and ideals of beauty. Stephen says love of humanitarian ideals, and it's fun to reflect on what we've heard already, that humanitarian also doesn't only mean humans, right? So how can we apply that word also to kind of a wider cast of all species here on Earth? Venus Revive writes, Venus in Aquarius, scientist. That's interesting. Would we expect all people with Venus and Aquarius to be scientists? So is Venus the planet that would most likely contribute to our occupation? Now, that question might be answered through an exploration of the houses. So if Libra, Venus's home, is at the midheaven, then I personally, in my astrology, would say, yes, Venus is likely going to contribute greatly to career. So for me, it doesn't have to be Mercury in Aquarius that makes a scientist. And by the way, you'll find tons of great scientists that don't have Aquarius in their chart. So we need to be careful there too. I see a lot of Cancer with scientists. Interesting, because I think like there's a wish to make a better world. But yeah, Venus for me with Libra at the midheaven is going to speak in some ways towards vocation, honors, reputation, and the like. And so much of what you're sharing here about Jane Goodall, we can really feel that kind of Aquarian tendency. So Discerning Light here says feminine breaking stereotypes. Yeah, that's a place where my education leads me. Like, I like to speak of Venus as the guidess. I prefer guide and guidess to gods and goddess personally. And that there's something about the kind of divine feminine nature. And we're going to look at Venus quite personally. So where is Venus in the natal chart? But also from a cyclical point of view. So to which cycle of Venus is a native born? And might that show, especially when we look at how their own natal chart is configured to Venus cycle charts, how they are an agent of this more kind of global or cultural devotion of, as I like to say, the archetypal ascent of the global guidance. So thanks for that. Let me check over here in the Instagram space and see if we heard any Venus in Aquarius delineations, and we did not. Okay, so let's get back to the chart. So on one level, just, okay, well, what is Venus and what is Venus doing in the nativity, right? And one thing I've been considering lately, let me go back to whole signs, is if we look through the 12 different maps or designs, the way I can do this at Astro Gold software, they did these things for sun sign or kind of horoscope writers, but I use them for many different ways. Is here's an Aries rising image of Jane Goodall's birth moment. Here's a Taurus rising image. Here's a Gemini rising image. Here's a Cancer rising image, right? So modern astrology kind of only teaches the Aries rising chart, right? And then so Venus is the second because Taurus is there, and Venus is the seventh because Libra is there. But if we look at this through the eyes of Sagittarius, then Venus's homes of Libra are on the 11th, and of Taurus are on the 6th. And it's kind of interesting about that. There's something in the 6th about like Well, traditionally the term was toil, but these days we often look at it as like sacred work, our practices. Like it's interesting, for example, that Sagittarius and Taurus are in conjunct, with Taurus as the 6th sign of the Sagittarius design. I find it fun to ask this question of why does Taurus make Sagittarius sick? It's also, why can this be a place where Taurus will, or Sagittarius will find medicine? But this glamping is the great example of the Taurus Sagittarius, or in this case, let's say Sagittarius Taurus in conjunct, or quincunx. Because glamping, you're trying to go out and about Sagittarius, but you need your comfort Taurus. And so you get neither of those things, right? That's an inconjunct. Taurus might make Sagittarius sick because am I ever going to take the great journey if, I need comforts, right? But also, like, how is that medicine? So once I've journeyed out and about, how can I find maybe Taurus, in the land, in my body, and deepening and finding some stillness? Like Sagittarius has a compulsion towards expansion. And often that can happen with our eyes closed, right? Or when we spend some time alone. And I imagine sitting with chimps, you're never alone, and you're the most alone you possibly could be. You know what I'm saying? There's like really time for stillness. In fact, like to make friends with a chimpanzee, I imagine you have to, at least for some time, be incredibly patient and incredibly still. You feel the Taurus on the 6th there. And then Libra is the 11th of that design. And so it's just kind of interesting to see that there's something about the 11th and the 6th that just in a Sagittarius rising chart, or in a Sagittarius map, as I like to call it, Venus is connecting those places, the 11th and the 6th. So, consider, for example, an ashram where we're having a community of people who are doing kind of sacred practices, and often in silence, right? Which can help guide the Sagittarius impulse. Do you feel me? Now, all that being said, the midheaven in Northern Hemisphere Sagittarius rising charts is often in the sign of Libra, which was the case at the time of Jane Goodall's becoming, or at least this biography time that we have her at 11:30 p.m. on this date. I think Maya wants to come say hello. Come in here real quick, baby. Hi. Hey, baby. So we were just talking about Venus, and so I see you're wearing your scallop shirt. Venus came in on this scallop, and we were talking about adventuring and journeying, and I see that you're wearing your backpack. So that's all quite appropriate for this transmission. Thank you, sweetie. And we were talking about animals, and so it's nice to have this bit of our journey soundtracked by Isabel's water drinking. How perfect. Thanks, son. All right, Izzy, come on. All right, friends, there's a good reason to support my work. So GeminiBrett.com/donate if you feel like you're receiving something here. Or GeminiBrett.com, click the sessions link and book a reading with me. Let's talk about Venus and your Venus cycle. Let's talk about Venus in Jane Goodall's chart. Looking at the time, we don't have all day. It's just so hard to look at one little part of a chart, It's actually kind of criminal to do so. Like we might say, Jane Goodall's an Aries. See? She was independent and a pioneer and went far and wide and courageously, and yeah. But we're seeing that kind of story shown in many ways. Okay, so Venus in Aquarius, there's something very revolutionary in the nature of the goddess, of the feminine. I love seeing Venus here with Saturn, so that can help us stay kind of grounded and very tuned to this thing that Libra itself is passionate about. Aquarius is the 5th of the Libra design. which is equanimity, right? Like equality for all. Like chimpanzees have rights too, for example, right? So I think Saturn is helping that, because when I consider Venus, I want to also consider her relations. Look at Venus as sextile with Uranus in Aries, right? Where there's something really revolutionary, new, sometimes heretical when we have strong connections with Uranus, like the steersman of the chart, opposite Uranus. Be interesting to know if Jupiter opposed Uranus before stationing retrograde. And the answer to that question is no. Although Jupiter would have squared Pluto 3 times during his retrograde loop. Actually, let's just see. I want to see where Jupiter stationed retrograde. 23:11. So yeah, didn't quite oppose Uranus, but was so strongly there configured, right? And so I'm always considering cycles as well. But Venus would certainly have sextiled Uranus 3 times around the time of Jane Goodall's birth, would have conjoined Saturn 3 times. And I'm interested in Saturn here. Some call the conjunction itself a hard aspect. I just kind of look at them and like kind of living in the same world. And traditionally, this is Saturn's world. So he would assist Venus in how to Aquarius. Modern astrology often, of course, considers Aquarius a Uranian thing. And there's a lot of sense to that, right? And the more kind of heretical, groundbreaking, expansive essence that Aquarius can be. And I want to consider all of these things. So there's a kind of the ability to stay grounded, so there's a PhD that we got to hear about. Thank you for the education. There's, deep scientists. We have protocols and these kinds of things, like especially if we want our work to be accepted by the scientific community. Like you can't just go completely heretical, but there is also something there too. And if I look at Venus as an image of the feminine and Venus cycles as this archetypal ascent of the global guidus, there's a quest here in the Aquarian way for equality and equanimity. Like, why can't I be a scientist, right? Because I'm a woman. Why can't I go to the great beyond and sit with troops of chimpanzees and the like? All right. So let's go play online in Wikipedia space and learn a thing or two, and then we'll look at Jane Goodall's Venus cycle. While I'm here, time for a plug as well. If you want to support the work, GeminiBrett.com, you'll find donate buttons all over the place. Buy me a cup of tea. I love it. You can join the Constellations community. Click there, or GeminiBrett.com/constellations. If you join, you're going to have access to all of these teachings that have been recorded thus far during our journey. And there is so much amazing stuff. And look, a community discussion is happening right now. Like we have regularly scheduled community discussions throughout the course of the week. It's an amazing place. I'd love for you to come join us. Check it out. All right, let's go over here to the Wikipedia space and we'll type in some Jane Goodall. April 3rd, 1934, passed just recently, October 1st, 2025, at the age of 91 in Los Angeles, California. English primatologist and anthropologist, regarded as a pioneer in primate ethology and described by many publications as the world's preeminent chimpanzee expert. She was best known for more than 6 decades of field research, right? You feel the Sagittarius and maybe that's in the Aries, right? In the field research, like out and about. On the social and family life, so we hear that Cancer, right? Social, 11th house, Jupiter, the steersman of the chart. Family, can connect this to the 4th, where we find the sun and Mars here, or in a whole sign design where we find Mercury, who represents the 10th, also in that Jupiter connection to Pluto, who's kind of transforming Cancer, right? All right. More than 6 decades of field research on the social and family life of wild chimpanzees in Kasakala chimpanzee community at Gombe Stream National Park. So we're going to want to know where that is. So like very much western Tanzania here. Okay, so like literally at the border. Okay, because maybe we'll see that in the maps in some ways too. So beginning in 1960, under the mentorship of the paleontologist Louis Leakey, Goodall's research demonstrated that chimpanzees share many key traits with humans, such as using tools, which I would suggest is a third house thing, having complex emotions, forming lasting social bonds, engaging in organized warfare, and passing on knowledge across generations, which redefine the traditional view that humans are uniquely different from other animals. That's awesome. That last one, I'm feeling a lot of like Saturn in this, right? All right. In 1965, Goodall was awarded a PhD in ethology from the University of Cambridge. In 1960s, published several accounts of her own research in Tanzania, including Tanzania, right? Including a series of articles in National Geographic. Her first book-length study, In the Shadow of Man, interesting, was later translated into 48 languages. Wow. She founded the Jane Goodall Institute in 1977 to promote wildlife conservation, followed by the Roots and Shoots Youth Program in 1991, which grew into a global network. Also established wildlife sanctuaries, reforestation projects, ethical treatment of animals. Like we're hearing tons of Aquarius and many of these things, I believe, and I imagine you would too. And by the way, like the shamanic astrology paradigm like celebrates that because they identify a woman like primarily with their Venus sign, right? Or a man with their Mars sign. Again, I think with like, well, let me just leave that there. So like I have a Cancer Mars, so I was just at a retreat with the Turning of the Ages Mystery School, and they're like, see, you're like all about your baby now and your dad. It's like, can't disagree. All right, so we're hearing tons of Aquarius, really strong Aquarius. From a traditional point of view, well, I would see that in a few ways. The steersman of the chart, because Sagittarius rising is Jupiter, Jupiter's in Libra, whereas Venus is in Aquarius. And how far away from Jupiter, I might ask, and go explore that thing. Also a Libra midheaven. So Venus is going to be the planet who's steering career and reputation and honors. And, the Wikipedia page is going to be much more typically about somebody's career, right? Legacy, 10th house themes than otherwise. But I am interested in like relationship life for Jane Goodall outside of the chimp. So let's see if there's anything there. Father was a businessman, mother a novelist who wrote under a pen name. So the family moved to Bournemouth, south coast of England. She went to the Upland School. Father gave her a stuffed toy chimpanzee named Jubilee as an alternative to a teddy bear. That's fun. Goodall had said her fondness for it sparked her early love of animals, commenting, "My mother's friends were horrified by this toy, thinking it would frighten me and give me nightmares," right? All right. Had always been drawn to animals in Africa, which brought her to the farm of a friend in the White Highlands in the colony and protectorate of Kenya in 1957. From there, she obtained work as a secretary. And acting on her friend's advice, she telephoned Louis Leakey. The Kenyan archaeologist and paleontologist with no other thought than to make an appointment to discuss animals. Leakey, believing that the study of existing great apes could provide indications of the behavior of early hominids, was looking for a chimpanzee researcher, though he kept the ideal to himself. Said he proposed that Goodall work for him as a secretary. After obtaining approval from his co-researcher and wife, the paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey, Lewis sent Goodall to Olduvai Gorge, later part of Tanzania, where he laid out his plans. So we got, I'm not going to do it today just because of time, but the synastry charts between Jane Goodall and Louis Leakey must be something to explore. But it's pretty cool, right? Like, I'm talking about Pluto in Cancer and a generation here to help completely like compost and evolve the nature of family nurturing, etc., which is going to say things like, yes, okay, well, a woman can be a secretary, but not a paleoanthropologist. So Mary Leakey's chart in that regard would be super cool to explore, right? Since obviously she was a pioneer in this regard even before Jane Goodall and supported this vision of her husband, maybe it was their vision together, to set Jane Goodall up. And here's this thing, right? The trimates. So Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and Barut Galdicus, chosen by anthropologist Louis Leakey to study primates in their natural environments. They studied chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans, respectively. So there's the third one I was looking for. Yeah, looking at all those charts together would be a really fascinating thing to do. As of 2019, the field of primatology is made up almost evenly of men and women, in part thanks to the trailblazing, we hear Aries there, right, work of Goodall, and her encouragement of young women to join the field, right? So almost evenly of men and women. We hear a lot of Aquarius there. Maybe Libra, equality, but Aquarius, equanimity, right? All right. Louis Leakey arranging funding, and in 1962, he sent Goodall, who had no degree, to the University of Cambridge. 8th person to be allowed to study for a PhD at Cambridge without first having obtained a bachelor's degree. Wow, amazing. Thesis completed in 66 on the behavior of free-living chimpanzees. On June 2006, the Open University of Tanzania awarded her an honorary Doctor of Science degree. I mean, these are all dates that would be fascinating to explore through our timing techniques. You really want to look at 1960 there, because this is telling us she studied chimpanzee social and family life, beginning with this chimpanzee community in Gombe Stream National Park in 1960. Okay. So that's, I guess, when she first went to be with the chimpanzees. Like, that's going to be an interesting thing to explore. Obviously, an interesting place to explore as well. So 1960, she's born in 1934. So she would have been like 26 years old. It's in a nodal reversal window for me, but we're going to see some other things in that realm, I'm sure. All right. Well, I'm wondering if I just scroll down. Activism, feeding stations, opinions and written works. Goodall was known to have supported the possibility that undiscovered species of primates may still exist, including cryptids such as Sasquatch, Yeren, I've never heard of Yeren, and other types of Bigfoot. Let's go. She talked about this possibility in various interviews and debates. In 2012, when the Huffington Post asked her about it, Goodall replied, "I'm fascinated and actually love them to exist," adding, "Of course, it's strange that there has never been a single authentic hide or hair of the Bigfoot, but I've read all the accounts." That's fun. religion and spirituality. I mean, with Neptune on high, I'm fascinated in that. And look, as a young woman, she took night classes in theosophy, right? Which means, look at the Venus glyph in there, right? Which means that she was no stranger to astrology, at least in Blavatsky's form. That's cool. So I just read, I fell madly in love with them. So I want to read this part. Goodall began attending more regularly as a teenager when the church appointed a new minister, Trevor Davies. He was highly intelligent and his sermons were powerful and thought-provoking. I could have listened to his voice for hours. I fell madly in love with him. Suddenly, no one had to encourage me to go to church. Indeed, there were never enough services for my liking. Of her later discovery of the atheism and agnosticism of many of her scientific colleagues, Goodall wrote that, fortunately, by the time I got to Cambridge, I was 27 years old and my beliefs had already molded so that I was not influenced by these opinions. So obviously interested in spirituality. Well, don't know what happened here with Trevor Davies, but we have to imagine that as a young girl with this crush, and it's, that probably didn't go anywhere, right? Personal life, here we go. So Goodall was married twice. On 28th March 64, she 64 when she was 32. Fun. Let's go look at that one. She married Baron Hugo van Lawick, a Dutch nobleman and wildlife photographer in London. She was known during their marriage as Baroness Jane van Lawick Goodall. Well, the couple had a son. They divorced in 1974, so 10 years later. The following year, she married Derek Breakison, a former member of Tanzania's parliament and the director of that country's national parks. He died of cancer in October 1980, also only 6 years later. And by the way, 16 years after 1964, when Jane Goodall was, am I doing the math right here, 1934 to 1980. I'm missing something, but we're going to look at that timing too. Okay, so owing to his position, the Tanzanian government, as head of the country's national park system, Brycean was able to protect Goodall's research project and implement an embargo on tourism in Gombe. Goodall stated that dogs and not the chimp she studied were her favorite animal. That's fun. She has prosopagnosia, which made it difficult to recognize familiar faces. Also known as face blindness, is a cognitive disorder of face perception in which the ability to recognize familiar faces, including one's own face, is impaired, while other aspects of visual processing and intellectual functioning remain intact. Wild. You ever heard of that? All right, anyway, I don't want to just keep reading. Died in her sleep of natural causes. We love that one. All right. So, I mean, we would need all the time in the world to go through many of the timing techniques that can show us about the time that The Simpsons parodied Goodall in 2001 or whatever it may be. Sorry, let me let Isabel in because we love dogs. All right, cool. Well, let's look for some of this in Jane Goodall's chart. I was especially interested in relationship because it's often nice hair, Brett. It's often something that we see in Libra, right? And again, Sagittarius rising, Jupiter in Libra. Now, I would expect some maybe kind of challenging situations in relationship because, as I shared very early on in the quest, I look for relationship, commitment, marriage, typically outside of Venus. I'm looking usually at the relationship between the planets that represent the first house of me and the seventh house of we, or the other of the spouse. And with Gemini bringing me to Mercury here in Pisces and Sagittarius bringing me to Jupiter here in Libra, though there's some disposership like Mercury's in Jupiter's sign, they are inconjunct. They're quincunx, right? I mean, they're actually 147 degrees apart. And that, that wasn't good math. But anyway, that kind of does a different thing. But regardless, I would expect some kind of blindness here. It's interesting to hear that her second husband was like involved with the land. Mercury ruling the 7th and the 4th. That's part of her work too. Mercury representing the 10th whole sign. But where might we see some of this in Venus, the Venus cycle, maybe even the relationship between Venus and Mars? That's the approach of many modern astrological paradigms, like the shamanic astrology paradigm, which is where I first studied. Anyway, so looking at Venus, there's many things that I'll do. One is like, okay, where is Venus by sign? And we see Aquarius. And so we've spoken about that a lot. And I think Jane Goodall is really shining that light of like a love for and a deep expression of, out of the box, expanding consciousness, the sciences. Theosophy was interesting to hear about. It's helpful to look at least a miniature biography like that, right? Because that's something very Aquarian in the kind of Blavatsky nature. Now, I might also look to the 9th, right? Where depending on the way I slice the chart, I can find the node, I can find Neptune, I can find Leo there, which directs me to the sun, right? So there's something Aries and kind of like maybe even a pioneering way of doing our journeys and our spirituality. Certainly that was true in these journeys too, and for her field work with chimpanzees, but also maybe in the Theosophy, which was new and kind of out there, of course, right? Exploring things like astrology. What would the scientists say who were agnostic or atheist, as we read from Jane Goodall's comments there as well. All right, so what about Venus in the houses? And here we find Venus in the 3rd. And I mean, it's interesting, by the way, that Sagittarius rising has Aquarius in the 3rd. I would say that there's something that we need to be innovative and inventive, Aquarius, in the way that we communicate. Now, oftentimes that's literally because the Sagittarius impulse will bring us to faraway lands and we don't share the common language, right? So we have to like learn, but also we need to be really innovative in the way that we communicate. Now, that would be exemplified by developing the ability to communicate with another species like chimpanzees, right? The 3rd I also see is like the tools. I mean, psychologically, inherently, it's like what we develop to meet our needs. It's like the needs of our needs, which is a word I have for the 2nd house. And I don't want to go too deep there because it will require another 36 hours and a lengthy course. But the 3rd, I think, is more than just siblings and speech. I would say it's siblings because they teach us speech and kind of compete for our needs and many other interesting things. But part of like her showing that chimpanzees are way more than what they were thought to be, because they, like humans, have tools and some of the social structures and passing things down through the generations. Like, do you feel like the Venus-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius in the 3rd there? That's really cool to see. And again, like I would expect some of this to show up in her work, mostly because, not because of Venus, but because Libra is at the midheaven, so because of Venus. I would also expect, again, as I said earlier, because Virgo's in the 10th sign, for Mercury to be contributing greatly there, and for Neptune and for Jupiter to be doing their things as well. All right. Well, I also want to consider the truth that none of these planets, including the moon, can be seen except for that they are reflecting sunlight to earthly eyes. So especially, I'm not a sun sign astrologer, especially when it comes to a nighttime chart, like the old religion that if you're born at the night, then the moon is your sect light. But I definitely don't want to sleep on the truth that none of these things can be seen if they weren't reflecting sunlight to our eyes. In fact, Mars can't be seen at the time of Jane Goodall's birth, not only because Mars is beneath the ground, right? But because Mars is so close to the sun. Mars is actually, when she was born, behind the sun. Look at Earth trying to find Mars. No way. Mars is in the midst of being disappeared for a couple months, which happens with Mars when he's back traveling behind the sun. From our point of view, we have no view of him, right? Well, could Venus be seen when Jane Goodall was born? Not here in Hampstead, UK, right? Because Venus is down beneath the ground. But I wonder if she could be seen in Africa. This is where Venus was rising when Jane Goodall was born, if this 11:30 p.m. time is true for her. And then this is where the sun was rising. Let me make that easier to see. We'll just put the rising lines on here in this astrocartography map. Okay, so Venus rising and sun rising. And especially with that Pisces Mercury rising in India, I'm kind of surprised it wasn't India for her. Now, a thing I was interested in seeing, and this is one thing I wanted to do about, she first went to Tanzania, or a place that would become part of Tanzania in 1960, we read, right? Let's go find that again so I can make sure I'm not messing that up. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, you know, the world doesn't stop spinning for us. So there's different ways our timing techniques can move us through time. One of these that I often find showing up on maps is what we call primary directions, where because the midheaven culminates at a rate of about 4 minutes per degree. So here's 4 minutes later, and you're going to see this go from 4 to 5. 4 minutes later, 5 to 6, and 6 to 7, right? Because that rate of 1 degree for 4 minutes, we often see that the chart is directing at a rate of 4 minutes equals a year of life. So in 1960, she's 26 years old. Well, 26 times 4 is 104 minutes. So if I direct this 104 minutes, and I should just say, this is like a really simple way, 4 minutes for 1 year of life, to primary direct a chart. It's like there's been millennia of debate that would suggest this is way too simple, but the other techniques will get you pretty close. So we still see Sagittarius rising, but now Venus is sending a sextile to what we call the directed ascendant. And I want to see on the map, bam. All right, this is amazing. This is a whole other thing. But look at how at that time, Venus is now rising so close to where Jane Goodall was born in Tanzania. The sun is rising over here. In other words, clouds allowing, in this moment, 104 minutes after her birth moment, this is like the place on Earth where Venus could be seen rising in the east. I need to put on these other astrocartography lines. Oh, and the moon, right? The Sagittarius moon, I'll just put a chart like here, would be at the midheaven. Chiron at the IC, I think, is also interesting. While Venus is rising and Saturn together are now visibly reflecting Aries light. Okay, well, speaking of, well, that's crazy to me. It's not shocking because I see this work with primary direction and astro maps all the time. Looks like maybe my screen wasn't shared when I just did that. Is that true? Somebody let me know, and if that is, we'll go through that again. But the moral of the story, the punchline of the not joke is that, oh, good, you saw it, great. So yeah, at the time, in the primary directed chart, when Jane Goodall first went to be with the chimpanzees in Africa, Venus was rising there visibly. And I'm interested in that because I know Jane Goodall was born with a morning star Venus. All right, so let's talk about that. And I didn't finish. I'm just realizing Venus reflecting the sun. So this is Aquarius Venus reflecting Aries sun. I really encourage you to consider that. When I'm looking at a Sagittarius moon, Well, that Sagittarius moon is reflecting Aries sunlight to my earthly eyes. When I'm looking at Aquarius Venus, that's an Aquarius Venus reflecting Aries sunlight to my earthly eyes. All right. And so this is the innovations of courage or revolutions of independence, right? Like the breakthroughs thanks to the pioneering spirit. You feel me? All right. Well, if we move some time after Jane Goodall's birth, we're going to see Venus rising here above the eastern horizon while the sun is beneath, right? This shows us that Venus is a morning star, and we don't need to turn the chart to see that. Once we've learned that the daily motion is clockwise through the chart, it's mirroring the clockwise motion of the stars through the northern hemisphere sky, right? And so after the moon rises, it'll climb up into the 11th and the 10th. When the Jupiter's in the 10th, he's going to culminate and then start coming down, right? Planets in the 3rd will 3, 2, 1 lift off, right? So Venus is on this side of the sun, right? She is counterclockwise, the sun in the chart, and that means she's going to rise before the sun, set before the sun, and so she's a morning star. She's very much a visible morning star in her phase, like she's so far from the sun, and she's just about elongated. So the furthest Venus can ever get from the sun is 48 degrees. That doesn't happen in every Venus sun cycle. And I saw this earlier because I noted that Venus at the time of Jane Goodall's birth is moving at 52 arc minutes per day. All right. Well, when Venus matches the speed of the sun, that's Venus at maximum elongation. The sun at the time of Jane Goodall's birth, 59 minutes per day, always about 1 degree per day, right? So we could look, let's go after her birth, and we can track Venus's speed. And I'm just looking here at when that becomes 59. Okay, so the sun's down to 58 at that point. So it's like here on April 16th, right? Like 13 days after her birth, when Venus reached maximum elongation at that time in the sign of Pisces, right? So just when Venus's speed is equal to the speed of the sun, that's maximum elongation. Because before this time, Venus was retrograde, right? Venus turns direct. And in that moment, let me just go back like an hour so we can see Venus retrograde, which is indicated in Astro Gold software, the way I have it set up by red font, right? So in the moment of Venus moving from retrograde to direct, she's in park, right? The speed is 0 degrees per day, right? That's stationing, stopped, right? And so from that time, if we move through the days, you can just look at the speed of Venus. And again, you can look right here. From 0 the next day at 2 minutes per day, and 4 and 7 and 9 and 11, right? So it takes Venus some time to match the speed of the sun. And when Venus does, and that's around here, Venus will then the next day be moving faster than the sun, and faster and faster. Venus can get up to about 1.25 degrees per day. The sun moving about 1 degree per day, right? So then eventually Venus will be moving faster than the sun, and then close the gap between the two, right? Now, looking at the time and knowing I have a reading here in 14 minutes, I'm just going to have to kind of jump quickly to some of the significant times of the Venus cycle. So this is Jane Goodall's birth moment. Well, I'm going to rewind to when Venus was between Earth and the sun. So this is the retrograde Venus Sun conjunction, and they happen about every 19 months. All right. So this is Venus coming between Earth and the sun. When Venus passes Earth, that's Venus retrograde for about 40 days and 40 nights. Okay. And I'm seeing that's in February of 1934. So by the way, where is the sun on February 4th, February 5th? It's in Aquarius. So I can see this is in Aquarius, this Venus interior conjunction with the sun, or retrograde conjunction with the sun. I see that as the intention of the entire cycle of Venus to which Jane Goodall and 19 other months of beings were born to. All right. Later, Venus will go back behind the sun from Earth's point of view for the exterior conjunction. Some call that superior, which means above, you see. And Venus has disappeared for like 2 months as she goes from the morning star side under the beams of the sun for kind of a death and rebirth, right? So I see that as like a necessary initiation for the cycle. So let's rewind before Jane Goodall's birth, and we'll look at Venus conjunct Sun. And we're here in Aquarius. All right, by the way, I want to look at before then, where was Venus when she stationed retrograde? And the answer is 2338 Aquarius. So I just want you to see that she had already passed Saturn. That means that Venus in her retrograde loop, like she'll conjoin Saturn 3 times, which I mentioned before. She's also, by the way, trining Jupiter when stationing retrograde and before Jupiter station. It's a Capricorn new moon. It's like an intriguing chart. And that's right where Saturn would be when she was born. Intrigues me too. But I want to show you as well that Venus had already cast a sextile to Uranus. So there's 3 Venus-Uranus sextiles during the time of this Venus retrograde loop as well. I'm very interested when Mercury or Venus do their loops to see what happens thrice. All right. Anyway, this key moment when Venus is between Earth and Sun, that's where I've come to look at the archetypal intention for this cycle. All right. So it's an Aquarius cycle and she has Aquarius Venus, but let's look at these many alignments. And by the way, for those of you who are in constellations, I'll use Jane Goodall's chart. Now I've seen a thing or two about her in a much faster way to explore like a deeper expression of the Venus cycles. And then we'll do our own charts, whoever wants to courageously step up. We'll look at Venus cycles that you were born to. So by the way, I'm intrigued to see, like at the time of this Venus Cazimi, Venus between Earth and Sun, first of all, where Jane Goodall was born. It was also Sagittarius rising, and the Libra Jupiter was culminating. It's intriguing. We see that echo in her chart. The Jupiter-Pluto square is perfect, by the way, 2311. And look at how close Uranus is. So that T square I was noticing is even stronger. And granted, the sun and the moon aren't in Aries like they were a couple months later in April when Jane was born. But the moon was in the picture then, right? So there's kind of a deep resonance between this Venus cycle chart and Jane Goodall's natal chart, right? She's one of like 19 months of beings that belong to this thing. So I'm very interested in seeing how does it activate her natal chart. Well, dig how Mercury in the Venus Cazimi charts at Jane Goodall's Venus, right? So I'm going to be particularly interested in how does the Venus point, the Venus-Sun conjunction of the Venus chart connect with Jane Goodall's chart or whoever else is born into this cycle. And an answer is a trine to her Jupiter. Well, I'm particularly interested in that because Jupiter is the steersman of the chart. Evolutionary astrologers will likely particularly be interested in the truth that it's very close to Jane Goodall's node, her north node. And by the way, I'm also interested in that, though that's not the paradigm in which I practice, all right? So in a Venus chart, I might be particularly interested in, okay, where is the Venus-Sun point aspecting the natal chart, and what planets of that Venus chart aspect the natal Venus? And the answer to that one is Mercury, right? I mean, like right there. So we're going to expect things mercurial, like writing books, like journeys, like developing communication. In Aquarius, maybe like out there, right? Like Pisces Mercury is going to be crazy helpful in the natal chart when we're trying to talk to another species, I would suggest. All right. So anyway, I'm also interested in this moment when Venus gets behind the sun, the exterior conjunction. I see that as like a necessary initiation. So the cycle is tuned to this archetype of Aquarius, the archetypal ascent of the global guidus. Like, let's have equanimity. Let's break the mold. Let's revolt, right? And I would suggest whether Jane Goodall is doing that, like vocally. Like she's a great heroine and role model for this, right? Like changing the game. We already read in just that short bio, like many contributions in that regard. I want to say, by the way, in this Venus chart, look at, there's a quintile. Let me bring my fives on here. Between, oh wait, did I do my math wrong? I did. Well, there is a, no, I'm just going to try to make some stuff up. My bad. I was looking at Venus and Uranus and I did bad math. So never mind all that. All right. So let me go to halfway through the 19-month cycle of Venus with the Sun. So this is Venus between Earth and the Sun, retrograde Venus conjunct Sun. About 9 months later, we get direct Venus conjunct the Sun, which means Venus behind the Sun. And this, if you're familiar with the story of Inanna, this is like her death and rebirth. And it's Scorpio. And in the 12th house of Jane Goodall's chart, it's interesting to see, like, in her birthplace, her Neptune degree and Neptune were rising at the time. It's interesting to see that that Scorpio star point is squaring her natal Venus. It's interesting to see the strength of Scorpio with Mercury conjunct Jupiter, the planets that represent her relationship axis, together conjoined. It's interesting to see the moon with Uranus. Like, you know, charts are always endless stories. But generally speaking, I think of an Aquarius Scorpio cycle as this intention to like change the world, to break through, to find equanimity, equality. There's a bit of a heretical nature, right? And specifically, I would say in regards to the archetypal ascent of the global goddess, right? So how is the divine feminine changing? Now, with her Venus cycle starting at 15 Aquarius, and this is a longer story, and gosh, I never have enough time because I'll just talk too much and want to explore every detail of a chart. But this is at astroseek.com, where I can show like the Venus star. Okay, so I have it set right here to show only retrograde Venus Sun conjunctions between the years of 2020 and 2030. And this is from 2020 in Gemini to 2022 in Capricorn, 2023 Leo, 2025 Aries, 2026 Scorpio. See that? The star that gets drawn, right? Well, let's rewind this so that we can see Jane Goodall's time here in 1934, where we have this Aquarius bit, right? So it's going at that time Aquarius, Virgo, Aries, Scorpio, Cancer. That's the Venus Sun conjunctions are going to be in those signs. Well, the Venus star that's drawn through these Venus Sun conjunctions in Earth's zodiac, it very slowly retrogrades. And typically there'll be about 13 like retrograde Venus Sun conjunctions in the same sign over the course of about 104 years. So with Jane Goodall born with Venus in a cycle where the retrograde Venus can join the Sun at like 15 Aquarius, that means she's like halfway through the Sun's journey through Aquarius, right? So like there's a strength in the midpoint, right? There's a strength also in the transformations. So I would expect something like that to be happening around here in 1990, when the cycle that was Aquarius now becomes Capricorn. And there's another important transition to show here. Let me just say that if I also showed the exterior conjunctions, the cycle that was Aquarius Scorpio became Capricorn inner, Scorpio outer, and then has just recently shifted to Capricorn Libra. So I see Jane Goodall as a member amongst many who are contributing to this great archetypal ascent of the global goddess through Aquarius intentions that necessitate a Scorpio initiation, but then itself will transition and transform to Capricorn Scorpio and then Capricorn Libra. And she lived through those transitions. And it would be really interesting to see how such a powerful woman and such an innovative and Aquarian and kind of groundbreaking woman, like deeply contributed to these changes. And I would love to see, especially in years like 1990, when we had the first retrograde Venus Sun conjunction in Capricorn, like what was Aquarius became Capricorn. In 2022, when the outer of Scorpio moved to Libra. Let me just show you like the not retrogrades. And you can see that date here in 2022. Right. So I'm always interested in where somebody is in the cycle, looking at the chakra moon gates, which we didn't do today. I have 1 minute before a reading, but I will just share, and I'm not going to share my screen when I do this, that according to the shamanic astrology paradigm tradition, so Daniel Jamario's approach that's utilized by many, we start looking at moon Venus conjunctions after Venus stations direct, when Venus is morning star, as it was for Jane Goodall's birth. And she's born 1, 2, 3 conjunctions afterwards. So we look at crown chakra, third eye, and then the throat. So there's really something about opening up and clearing the blockages around communication, expression, sharing, right? Venus in Aquarius in the third, like that's going to help there too. By the way, the moon gate chart is a moon Venus conjunction in Aries. Amazing. So great chart example. Just not nearly enough time to really get into this, because I can't. It's just so hard for me to go straight to Venus. Like I need to consider in a Sagittarius rising chart what Jupiter's doing, in a nighttime chart what the moon's doing, right? On and on. But those are some of the things that I want to look at and kind of, and there's many more as I explore not only a native's Venus, but how they're connected to the movements and the evolution of cultural Venus. All right. So again, GeminiBrett.com, if you want to explore this in your own chart with me. It's something I love to do. My schedule is way more open right now than it usually is, which means I need some work, friends. So if you want to support the work, please look into it. You'll also find a donate button at my website. If you'd like to buy me a cup of tea, please hit the like button and share this around. I always have hundreds of people watch the videos and I don't know, scores of people like it. And it's like, it's not good. This could be more organized. Let's all admit that. But anyway, also please consider checking out the Constellations community. You can just click the Constellations community tab when you're over at GeminiBrett.com. Give us a try for a month. Come hang out. Come study these mysteries with other seekers like you. All right. Thanks again for spending some time, friends. I will see you in space.